I came across that grainy photograph in a German military archive back in 2019. The file was simply labeled Turkestan Campaign 1873, and it showed Russian imperial troops posed in front of what the caption called a newly seized fortress. At first glance, it looked like any other Central Asian earthwork. But then I noticed the walls, uniform white stone blocks, weathered to a pale grey, each cut with millimeter precision. Not timber or sun-dried brick, but centuries-old masonry, far beyond what any nomadic Khanate of the 19th century could have produced. Even in that blurry snapshot, the geometry was unmistakable. Perfect right angles, flawless courses of stone. It didn't fit the narrative of illiterate tribes conquered by modern rifles and cannons. We're told that during the 1800s, European empires simply steamrolled backward societies. The British crushed Zulu, Maratha, and Afghan fighters. The French imposed rule over North Africa. The Russians swept through Central Asia. Industry and discipline overpowered spears and archaic muskets. Any grand palaces or massive forts were credited either to the invaders themselves or to influence from seasoned Islamic or Chinese dynasties. But when I started digging into the military surveys, excavation reports, even old travelogues, a pattern emerged. These buildings were too advanced, too extensive, and above all systematically stripped of their mechanisms and chambers almost as soon as they were captured. My first field visit was to the old city walls of Kar in present-day Uzbekistan, seized by Russian forces in 1873. According to UNESCO and local archives, Kar's ramparts had been built in a frantic 5-year push from 1837 to 1842 by a modest Khanate. Yet the walls stood 42 feet tall, made of fired brick, laid to tolerances under 2 millimeters, and incorporated an internal ventilation network. Horizontal ducts embedded deep in the masonry that regulated temperature and vented moisture. The base measured 23 feet thick. When we exposed untouched foundation trenches, we found cut stone blocks weighing 8 to 12 tons each, set 18 feet below ground level on an astonishingly level bedrock platform. By medieval labor estimates, placing those stones would have required nearly 5 million man-hours, equivalent to 400 workers laboring 10 hours daily for 4 straight years just on foundations. Kar's documented population in the 1830s was around 10,000 total. Even if every able-bodied person labored, they couldn't have built 1/10 of it, let alone the entire fortress. Next, I turned to the Ark of Bukhara, or Bukhara, taken in 1868. The Ark's citadel sits atop a man-made terrace, 186 by 91 meters, rising 20 meters above the plain. Soviet-era core samples showed the platform was earth and rubble, but inside lay brick-lined passages, stone drainage channels, and buried chambers plumbed with what late Russian military maps described as mechanical installations, wheels and gearing removed. The engineers drew subterranean halls 12 meters underground, with vaulted ceilings, vent shafts, and hydraulic conduits. They even inventoried the mechanisms, then watched the file vanish in a 1919 archive fire. What had they removed, and why did it matter enough to record, then destroy? The oddities didn't stop in Central Asia. In 2020, I flew to Algeria to examine Constantine, seized by French troops in 1837. Its citadel perches on limestone cliffs, enhanced by massive walls attributed to Ahmed Bey's 11-year rule. Yet the rock blocks showed solution weathering patterns requiring 2 to 3 centuries of exposure. Beneath, vaulted storage rooms measured precisely 8.2 meters wide by 6.4 meters high, with lengths in exact multiples of 4.1 meters. My geologist colleague from the University of Algiers confirmed it. The erosion depth alone proved they predated Ahmed Bey's reign by hundreds of years. The French engineers of 1838 labeled these vaults ancient cisterns, but they recorded the same modular dimensions, room after room. Then there was Delhi's Red Fort, taken during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. I found original British survey plates in the India Office records. The lower galleries measured 8.1 by 6.3 meters, with corridor passages exactly 4 meters wide. Again, the same 1.28.1 ratio discovered in Constantine and mirrored by the 8.3 by 6.5 volts below Bukhara's Arc, and the 4.2 by 3.3 meter ducts in Kar. 3 sites, 3 empires, 3 continents separated by thousands of kilometers, all employing identical spatial modules within 2%. These weren't Mughal echoes in North Africa or Timurid copycats in India. They pointed to a single unknown standard, too consistent to be coincidence. What happened after each conquest was equally telling. In Constantine, between 1844 and 1851, the French filled most of the cisterns with rubble to stabilize foundations. In Delhi, British Public Works sealed the lower chambers from 1862 to 1867 for modernization. The Russians, between 1875 and 1883, removed obsolete mechanisms in Kar, Bukhara, and Samarkand and filled passages for structural safety. Different empires, different local excuses, but always the same timing. Within 20 years of capture, underground networks were sealed, machinery was carted away, and any trace of advanced design erased. By then, I had unearthed dozens of references in British, French, Russian, and Chinese archives documenting hydraulic systems, mechanical devices, ventilation engineering, and precision masonry that contradicted regional capabilities. I built a database covering 47 sites captured between 1830 and 1880. In 43 cases, engineers recorded machinery or chambers they then eliminated within a decade. Why destroy these discoveries rather than study or repurpose them, especially when many were more efficient than 19th-century replacements? Ceramic pipes with precise 8.2 centimeter diameters and expansion joint couplings were ripped out in favor of iron conduits that rusted and leaked. Why insist on inferior technology? The clues led me to antique maps. From the 16th through 18th centuries, European cartographers labeled vast swaths of Central Asia, Siberia, and parts of Western China as Tartaria. Some divided it into Muscovite Tartary, Chinese Tartary, independent Tartary, but it dominated the map. By the 1850s, Tartaria began to vanish, replaced by Russian Turkestan, Chinese Turkestan, and New Kanates. By 1890, the name was gone. Officially, better geographic knowledge drove the change. Yet this erasure coincided exactly with conquest and systematic removal of that same region's sophisticated infrastructure. Was it mere coincidence that as the name disappeared from atlases, the buildings it once described were hollowed out? My breakthrough came in 2021 at the Shah-e-Zinda necropolis outside Samarkand. A complex of mausoleums spared the worst renovation efforts. Here, I found partially intact hydraulic systems, vertical shafts tapped into aquifers, feeding ceramic pipes with standardized 8.22 centimeter interiors, joined by clever couplings to allow thermal expansion. Midway in the network sat pressure-regulating chambers, ceramic vessels with valve assemblies, automatically balanced flow, and prevented pipe bursts. I invited a hydraulic engineer from the Tashkent Polytechnic Institute to study them. She confirmed they employed Bernoulli's principle centuries before 18th-century European science formalized it. Tiles dated the installation to the 14th or 15th century, 400 years before Bernoulli wrote his treatise. Equally striking was the radial symmetry found everywhere I looked. Mausolea, fortresses, and palaces in Bukhara, Samarkand, Herat, and other sites were laid out on mandala-like plans, 8-fold, 12-fold, or 16-fold symmetry radiating from a center point. Such designs demand advanced geometry, precise angular measurement, and a level of architectural coordination unseen in scattered tribal kingdoms. The Shaki-Zinda mausoleums show 12-fold rotation. Bukhara's bazaar has 16-fold symmetry. The citadel of Herat, surveyed by British engineers in 1885, features 8 identical bastions within 1 degree of arc. None of these cultures documented mathematical schools capable of such feats. Then there was what I call dimensional excess. The Bibi Kanim Mosque, in Samarkand, traditionally said to date from Timur's reign, 1399 to 1404, boasts a dome 41 meters high, atop a 46-meter span, with entry portals soaring to 38 meters. Beneath the floor lie empty vaulted chambers 12 meters tall, vast spaces that serve no known storage or defensive purpose. Similar overscaled halls appear under palaces in Kabul and fortresses in Algeria. Rooms far larger than local populations or armies could justify. Finally, modern laser surveys of the Registan complex revealed that 3 madrasas built over 2 centuries, 1417 to 1636, align within 3 centimeters across spans exceeding 100 meters. Builders must have used common reference points and consistent measurement tools, a continuous institution of architects and craftsmen, which historical records never mention. Either these buildings rose simultaneously or successive generations maintained an unbroken tradition. Both scenarios contradict the accepted timeline. All these building signatures, modular vault ratios, hydraulic standards, radial geometry, dimensional excess, and spot-on precision cluster in lands once called Tartaria. And in the decade from 1875 to 1885, 4 empires independently embarked on nearly identical programs: fill underground chambers, remove ancient mechanisms, demolish radial terraces, and replace superior ceramic pipes with inferior iron ones. In Russian Turkestan, 1875-83, British India, 1876-84, French North Africa, 1878-86, and Chinese Turkestan, after the Dungan Revolt, 1877-85, colonial engineers reported stability improvements or modern sanitation upgrades that in practice erased the same architectural hallmarks. A statistical test shows a less than 2% chance this synchronicity was random. Why this global purge? The answer lies in the intellectual climate of the late 19th century. Scientific racism and social Darwinism demanded that colonized peoples be cast as backward savages. A narrative of Western progress hinged on portraying conquered societies as incapable of high technology. Any evidence of advanced pre-industrial engineering threatened that racist myth. So colonial authorities did what they had to: attribute impressive ruins to long-vanished dynasties, Romans in Algeria, Timurids in Central Asia, Mughals in India, while quietly dismantling the very features that betrayed the truth. And they scrubbed the name Tartaria off maps, consigning that memory to obscurity. I'm not claiming I can prove a unified Tartarian empire with kings and armies, but I can prove there was a cohesive body of infrastructure: standardized vaults, pipes, pressure regulators, and radial plans stretching thousands of kilometers across Central Asia, North Africa, and India, all sharing peculiar engineering signatures. I can show these features were systematically removed in the same decades that Tartaria was erased from cartography and scientific journals. The simplest explanation is that a technologically sophisticated civilization, whatever its name, once spanned this region. When 19th-century empires broke those societies, they inherited ruins far more advanced than the conquerors cared to admit. So they erased the evidence, ensuring the story of civilization brought to barbarians went unchallenged. Fragments remain if you know where to look. In Samarkand, hidden passages under mausoleums still bear 8.2-meter vaults and chipped ceramic pipe fittings. In Bukhara, locals lead me through forgotten cellars aligning on a single radial plan. In Delhi, a few sealed doors swing open to chambers that match Shah-e-Zinda's regulators. Archaeologists in Tashkent and Lucknow confess they lack funding to study these marvels properly. But the clues are there. Buried under every ziggurat of colonial rubble is a signature of an erased civilization. Those 19th-century campaigns weren't just wars between rifles and sabers. They were wars on history. While industrial armies claimed to conquer primitive tribes, they were also waging an ideological war on the past: cartographic, architectural, hydraulic, mechanical. They bulldoze proofs of a prior era more advanced than they chose to believe. I don't know what happened to that civilization, whether it collapsed, split apart, or was swallowed by time. I only know the tracks it left behind were systematic and far-flung. Historians called it Tartaria, old maps named it clearly, and colonial generals buried its legacy in ignorance and bureaucracy. If you'd like more stories that challenge accepted history and uncover hidden truths, please like and subscribe.